She had just finished washing up and was about to rest, when a strange man suddenly attacked her from behind. Her husband seemed to hear something unusual, but he never received any response from his wife. He took a pistol from the drawer, but he was still easily subdued by 3 spies. They searched the entire house and took away the Revolutionary Army's confidential documents. When the wife rushed out in disheveled clothes, her husband had already been tied up and loaded onto a carriage. They took the man to the riverbank and executed him without hesitation. As a member of the Revolutionary Army, the woman did everything she could to find her companions.
Angelo! Angelo!
Because of this crucial information, Angelo narrowly escaped the pursuit of Austrian spies. With the revolutionary plot exposed, Angelo was forced to leave Italy and go into exile in France. At that time, France was being ravaged by a cholera outbreak. However, as soon as Angelo arrived at a village, he noticed a woman's foot exposed outside the door. When Angelo slowly stepped into the house, an even more horrifying scene appeared before his eyes. Almost the entire family had perished in the cholera outbreak. Seeing crows feeding on decaying flesh, Angelo felt his stomach churn and hurried out of the room. When he kicked open a second door, the scene inside was no different from before. The house was in disarray, and a stray dog was gnawing at a corpse. Dizzy and nauseated, Angelo could only kneel by the grass to ease his discomfort. At that moment, a curly-haired man dismounted from his horse, and he was the village doctor. The doctor pinned Angelo to the ground and carefully examined his complexion and eyes. After confirming that Angelo was not infected, the doctor handed him a bottle of strong liquor. After Angelo took a large gulp, the kind doctor insisted on entering the town to treat the survivors. In an attic in the town, Angelo witnessed firsthand the terror of cholera. In France at that time, with its underdeveloped sanitation system, once someone was infected with cholera, they would suffer severe diarrhea and vomiting, and die within a short time from dehydration and convulsions. But the doctor had an old method of treatment, pouring strong liquor over the patient's body and then vigorously rubbing it to speed up blood circulation. Unfortunately, this survivor could not be saved. The doctor was deeply regretful about it. He had lived in the town his entire life and was familiar with every road. Watching people die one after another, his heart was filled with indescribable grief. While the two were talking, the doctor suddenly felt exhausted. Although he said he needed to continue the journey as soon as possible, the illness was slowly consuming his body. Before his death, the kind doctor asked Angelo to release the nearby sheep and poultry, so they would not starve in the abandoned village. When Angelo returned, the doctor was already unwell, yet he still smiled and talked with him. Angelo had originally been born into a wealthy family, and to support his father's revolutionary ideals, his mother had spent money to buy him the rank of a light cavalry colonel. Gradually, the doctor began to lose consciousness, and his whole body trembled uncontrollably. Angelo used the folk remedy the doctor had taught him, but in the end, he still could not save his life. To uphold his ideals and mission, Angelo could only continue heading south. Whenever he encountered wandering villagers, Angelo would offer them help. In the forest, Angelo met a female teacher and 2 children, who were hiding from the pursuit of militia forces. The teacher was heading to the outskirts of Marquis to deliver the 2 children to their father. Without the slightest hesitation, Angelo kindly gave his horse to the 2 children. In the dim cover of night, he led the female teacher and the children as they quietly slipped through the village. By the time they reached Marquis, it was already the next morning, but they were soon discovered by nearby militia forces. Cholera had already spread here, and the militia stopped them and took them into a quarantine house on the outskirts of the city. They were required to stay there for 3 to 4 days, and only after confirming they were not infected could they leave. The female teacher felt deeply guilty about this, believing that if not for her and the children, Angelo would have already gone far away. Angelo did not take it to heart, and even ordered 2 roasted chickens and a bottle of wine from a vendor outside. However, this action was opposed by an elderly man, because the quarantine house had strict rules. Food like poultry could not be brought in from outside, as it could easily increase the risk of infection. But Angelo did not listen to the old man's warning. As the 2 argued, a woman suddenly collapsed to the ground, her body trembling uncontrollably, clearly showing she had been infected with cholera. Everyone around was unwilling to approach, and only Angelo stepped forward, dragging the woman outside. Seeing the urgency of the situation, the old man who had just argued with Angelo stepped in to help, and together they carried the patient away. Angelo even obtained a bottle of strong liquor from a hotel owner, and under the bright sunlight outdoors, he used it to wipe the woman's entire body. While everyone was still shaken, the female teacher read from the Bible to the children, praying that God would save the young maid. But unfortunately, God did not spare the maid, and Angelo was unable to pull her back from death. On the way back to the quarantine house, Angelo discussed escaping with the old man, as he could not remain trapped here. From the old man, he learned the guards' patrol patterns, and that very night, taking advantage of a moment of lax security, Angelo led the teacher and the two children to escape through a hole in the back wall. The next morning, the teacher finally delivered the two children safely back to their home. To thank Angelo for his help, the teacher gave him her cherished painting, hoping that the beautiful princess in it could redeem suffering people with divine power. Upon arriving at the city center, Angelo eagerly washed himself at a fountain, but the townspeople mistakenly believed he had come to poison the water. Soon, a crowd surrounded Angelo, and he was inexplicably accused of being a poisoner. Without any investigation, the people dragged Angelo to the police chief's office, but the chief had no intention of handling the case, as he was busy packing in panic, preparing to flee out of fear of the spreading cholera. Angelo had a comrade here, a shoemaker, but Austrian spies had already found him first.
Giuseppe!
With an angry mob blocking his way and pursuers chasing behind him, Angelo could only run for his life. Fortunately, several spies drew the attention of part of the crowd, giving Angelo the chance to hide in a private house. Even so, he was still injured. Inside the house lay the body of a woman who had long since died, along with a calm little cat lingering nearby. The furious crowd that rushed and saw the corpse and recoiled in fear. Retreating from the house, Angelo moved swiftly across the rooftops, and the little cat seemed unusually attached to him, closely following behind. On the rooftop, Angelo treated his wounds, and with nothing else to do, he spoke to the cat about his mother and the ideals in his heart. The cat seemed to understand, meowing continuously in response. Meanwhile, the three Austrian spies were fleeing in all directions under the pursuit of villagers. One of them was surrounded by the crowd and ultimately overwhelmed, losing his life in the street. That night, heavy rain poured down, and cold and hungry, Angelo quietly slipped into a house through a skylight, with the little cat following closely behind. The cat walked forward without hesitation into the hall on the first floor, while Angelo followed behind, barefoot, slowly descending from the second floor. He was soaked to the bone, looking utterly disheveled. At that moment, Pauline, dressed in a white gown, slowly stepped out of a room holding a candle holder. The candlelight illuminated her delicate face, as pure and radiant as the revolutionary faith Angelo held onto. In his ragged state, Angelo looked like a criminal, and he expected Pauline to drive him away. But instead she invited him inside and prepared food for him. It turned out Pauline was not the owner of the house, as it belonged to her aunt's family. Because of the cholera outbreak, her aunt's family had already fled overnight. Pauline prepared bread and hot tea for him. Perhaps due to his noble upbringing, Angelo kept apologizing, feeling deeply ashamed for his sudden intrusion and disheveled appearance. After a brief conversation, Angelo felt he should leave, but Pauline ran after him and called him back. Delighted, Pauline brought out plum wine, but when she returned to the table, Angelo had already fallen asleep over it. Looking out the window at residents fleeing in all directions, Pauline felt filled with anxiety and unease. By the next morning, Angelo awoke after a night of deep sleep at the table, hearing the chaotic sound of galloping horses outside. When he entered Pauline's room, it was already empty, with only a white dress left behind. As cholera swept through the entire town, government troops were disinfecting and evacuating people everywhere, and Angelo had no choice but to move along with the crowd. Along the way, he passed by the small house where the teacher and the two children had lived, and when he pushed the door open, he discovered that all three had already died. With no other choice, he could only follow the crowd and move toward the mountains. Fortunately, he encountered an acquaintance, the very shoemaker he had been searching for, and also his revolutionary companion in the town. In the remote and quiet mountains, Angelo wrote a letter to his mother far away. Even with the long distance and blocked routes, his longing for her still tugged at his heart. At that time, vast regions of southern France had already fallen, and all the people were trapped in the suffering brought by cholera. Angelo, like a fearless warrior, crossed the entire plague-stricken region and arrived at Marquis. He had no intention of staying there, as he needed to return to Italy to continue his revolutionary mission. His companion had gathered a sum of money for the revolutionary cause and asked him to deliver it to their comrade in Marseille. Because cholera had blocked the original route, the companion replanned Angelo's journey, requiring him to first deliver the money to Milan. Taking advantage of the cover of night, Angelo left the town shrouded in cholera, carrying his companion's instructions, but by then, the borders of Monosque had already been sealed by the military, and no one was allowed to leave without permission. Also trapped there was Angelo's former comrade, Luke Colporter. This man had once betrayed the revolutionary organization and colluded with Austrian spies to capture Angelo, and now he had unfortunately been infected with cholera. The two former friends met again, filled with guilt. Luke Colporter tried desperately to flee, but his weakened body could not endure, and he soon fell from his horse. Seeing his miserable and pitiful state, Angelo felt a deep sense of sorrow. Soon, Luke Colporter's condition worsened rapidly, and he curled up by a stream, vomiting continuously. Seeing this, all the hatred in Angelo's heart vanished, and he stepped forward, forcing strong liquor down Luke Colporter's throat in an attempt to save him. This scene was witnessed by Pauline on the riverbank.
Mio padre, hanno preso mio padre. Bisognava farlo, dovevo.
Luke Colporter had betrayed his brothers because spies had captured his father, and for the sake of his family, he had no choice but to sell out his companions. At the same time, the sound of a horse neighing caught Angelo's attention. While he was treating Luke Colporter, the gunshot had frightened his horse, causing it to run off wildly. To calm the startled horse, Pauline stepped forward and gently tended to it.
Vous le connaissiez?
Oui, depuis l'enfance.
Revenez, madame, revenez!
Vous l'avez touché, vous leur faites peur?
Je vous fais pas peur?
Tenez.
Pauline had long grown weary of the chaos and confinement around her, and she was desperate to leave this plague-stricken land, a desire that perfectly aligned with Angelo's. With the road ahead blocked by the military, Angelo came up with a risky escape plan, and although Pauline hesitated at first, she ultimately chose to trust him. And so, Pauline rode Luke Colporter's horse, traveling alongside Angelo as they moved through the forest along a stream. Before long, they reached a checkpoint guarded by 20 sentries. Angelo observed the angle of the sunlight and stepped forward alone to deal with the guards, attempting to bribe them with money, but the sentries insisted on arresting him. At that moment, the clouds parted, and the intense sunlight reflected off the water, creating a blinding glare. Angelo loudly signaled Pauline, and while he stalled the guards, Pauline seized the opportunity to slip through a gap in the defense. By the time the guards raised their guns and fired, the reflection on the water blocked their view, making it impossible to aim. In this way, Angelo and Pauline narrowly crossed the border. After crossing the border, the two did not part ways. Pauline intended to return to her homeland to search for her husband, while Angelo planned to go back to Italy. Pauline did not want to trouble Angelo by having him accompany her, but Angelo remained worried about her safety if she traveled alone. Perhaps it was his ingrained sense of chivalry, or perhaps the feelings quietly growing in his heart. Angelo insisted on escorting Pauline, but Pauline, strong-willed by nature, did not want to delay his original journey. To ensure her safety, Angelo willingly altered his planned route. That night, the two camped in the forest. To avoid being discovered by patrolling guards, Angelo did not light a fire for warmth, yet worried that Pauline would be cold. He took a thick coat from his pack and draped it over her shoulders. From that moment on, Pauline's attitude toward him gradually changed from initial caution and distance to a deep emotional bond. She was no longer tense and serious at all times, and when she spoke with Angelo, her eyes were filled with gentle warmth. The next morning, flocks of crows circled above the treetops. A fire had already been lit beside Pauline. When Angelo returned from fetching water, he suddenly heard a sharp gunshot. He hurried back, only to see that Pauline had been startled by the crows. Trembling and covering her face as tears fell, Angelo stepped forward to comfort her gently, and after a moment, Pauline regained her composure and shyly put some distance between them. Even so, feelings had already taken root in both of their hearts. This tense and awkward moment left even the usually composed and dignified Pauline at a loss for words. Afterward, Angelo treated her wounds and used the methods he had learned to disinfect them. Then the two rode across the grasslands together. Along the way, they encountered an old villager, who seemed uneasy upon seeing the two strangers. After a brief conversation, they learned that the old man was a rural doctor, and Angelo even bought 2 packets of herbal medicine from him. The three of them rested under a large tree, as Angelo asked the old man about the road ahead, while Pauline sat quietly, lost in thought. When the old man mentioned Mon Dieu, Pauline immediately became alert. Her husband was a Marquis, and the two had been separated when the war broke out. She had been staying at her aunt's house ever since, waiting for a reunion with her husband, but the endless days of waiting had filled her with anxiety. Upon hearing that a mayor who had once worked with her husband was in Mondial, Pauline decided to go there to seek news. In the end, Angelo paid 100 francs to hire the old man as their guide. Mondial was under strict control, with rigorous epidemic prevention measures, and not a single case of cholera had appeared there. Under the old man's guidance, Pauline arrived at the mayor's residence in the town. When the people inside heard that the visitor was a Marchioness, they warmly stepped forward to greet her, but when they learned she came from the cholera-stricken Manosque, the room instantly fell into panic. Not long after, the mayor hurried back to the residence. From the mayor's words, Pauline learned that her husband had already left for Manosque 10 days earlier. The news struck like a bolt from the blue. Pauline could not imagine her husband's current situation, as the haunting images of him infected with cholera flooded her mind. Filled with guilt, she believed that if she had followed him back then, things would not have turned out this way. Overwhelmed by regret, she decided to return to the worst-hit area of Manosque to find her husband, but before she could leave the residence, someone arrived with sentries to surround them. Fortunately, the mayor intervened, allowing Angelo and Pauline to escape. The two traveled through the night under the moonlight until the next morning. Angelo woke up in a house, and Pauline, filled with urgency, insisted on heading immediately to the cholera epicenter. Angelo tried his best to stop her, following closely behind in an attempt to persuade her, but Pauline had already made up her mind, and Angelo could only silently follow her. Before Pauline had gone far, she was surrounded by local troops and taken directly into a quarantine zone. Inside the quarantine area were infected patients everywhere, and sentries frequently carried bodies in and out. Just as Angelo felt overwhelmed with despair, he turned back despite originally planning to leave for Italy. Relying on his rank as a light cavalry colonel, he forced his way into the quarantine zone to find Pauline. Because of his high rank, the guards arranged a spacious room for the two of them. Angelo's decision to walk into danger deeply moved Pauline, who was already burdened with guilt. Since entering the quarantine zone, Angelo had been planning their escape, but Pauline had already lost hope. Surrounded by patients and guards, believing there was no chance of survival, the resilience and determination within Angelo deeply shook her. That night, while everyone was asleep, Angelo set fire to the dry grass nearby. As the flames spread, the people inside rushed toward the exit in desperation. The guards had no choice but to open the doors, and amid the chaos, Angelo quietly escaped with Pauline. After a long night of travel, the two reached a mountaintop. Now very close to the Marquis' territory, Pauline still held onto a sliver of hope, wanting to take a chance. As they passed through the forest, heavy rain suddenly fell, and they found shelter in an abandoned manor, planning to continue once the rain stopped. Angelo lit a fire inside and found some red wine in the cellar. This was a place where Pauline had once lived, and being there allowed her to finally relax. She changed into the long dress of the lady of the manor, the same white gown she wore when they first met. It was this very dress that kept Angelo restless through the night, as emotions he could not suppress stirred within him, leaving him unable to meet her gaze. Perhaps influenced by the wine, Pauline slowly began to speak about her past with her husband. When they first met, she was only 16 years old. That day by the river, a man fell with a gunshot wound to his chest, and she ran home to bring her father to treat him, then cared for him day and night. Weeks later, the man recovered and left, and she thought they would never meet again. Yet half a year later, he returned to propose to her. He was 40 years older than she was. After hearing this story, Angelo's emotions surged, and he struggled to remain composed. Soon the rain stopped, and Angelo proposed that they leave immediately, but Pauline, still affected by the wine, wanted to stay the night. Angelo, who had always complied with her wishes, now packed his belongings and insisted on leaving before nightfall. Pauline was filled with confusion, wondering why the man who had always protected her now insisted on leaving early. Overwhelmed by emotion, Pauline lost control and collided with the glass. Worried, Angelo rushed forward to check on her. The chivalric code ingrained in Angelo since childhood, along with honor and loyalty, constantly restrained him. The bond between them was deep, not merely worldly romance, but a connection forged through shared hardship. As Pauline slowly walked up the steps, Angelo finally noticed something was wrong with her. At that moment, Pauline was extremely weak and could barely hold the candle in her hand.
No!
Angelo quickly helped her to the fireplace and used strong liquor to clean her. and seeing her in pain brought tears to his eyes. He cast aside all worldly concerns and used the traditional method to treat cholera, continuously rubbing her body. Ignoring Pauline's resistance, he removed her clothing and continued applying and rubbing the liquor. With the fire burning brightly, he worked through the entire night without rest, trying again and again to save her. By the next morning, Angelo was awakened by a gentle touch, and Pauline had begun to recover. After a brief rest, Angelo continued escorting Pauline on their journey. Before long, an old man arrived on horseback, and Angelo finally fulfilled his wish, safely delivering Pauline to her husband. With his mission complete, he quietly turned and left. A year later, an uprising broke out in Italy against Austrian rule. Worried about Angelo's safety, Pauline wrote a letter to his mother to express her concern. As time passed, the experience they shared in desperate circumstances remained etched in her heart. She often returned to her aunt's old house, reminiscing about the moments of their first meeting. Day after day passed without a reply, and just as she began to lose hope, a letter from Italy finally arrived. Pauline's husband had long understood her feelings, and he stated clearly that if she insisted on searching for Angelo, their marriage would end. Their parting had been sudden and helpless, leaving behind unspoken emotions and a silent longing stretching across the years. Villages may burn and birds may migrate, but a true feeling never fades or disappears. Their love ended in regret, yet within that regret lay a lifetime of quiet waiting. Pauline's figure remained slender and solitary, like a breeze through the Alps, and this encounter and love had already become an eternal landscape in her life.